Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Circle City Sports Podcast. As always, your host, Sam Sinclair. With me, as always, is Jake. Jake, how you doing today, man?
Doing good. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. Just staying busy with work, golfing all the time because, my dad's out of work. But we're keeping busy. We're trying to produce as much content as we can for you guys. Like so on the last episode, Jake's been moving, so he's been kind of busy with that. But, it's got to be pretty exciting. I've moved, I told you, 7 times in my life, so I know almost all the ins and outs of moving.
This will be the last time I move in my life until it's a nursing home.
See, my parents say that every time they moved, and 7 times later, we're back in Indiana. So I just let life take its way. So, but today's episode, we're going to talk about the tight ends as we continue our State of the Colts series. Last year, we kind of saw a rather inconsistent play from the tight end group, really outside of reliable Jack Doyle. And in 16 games last year, Doyle only had 43 catches, 448 yards, and 4 touchdowns, all career lows, while one at least playing at least 10 games as a full-time starter since 2016. And Jake, I think you and me both can agree the most impacted player from the Andrew Luck retirement was Eric Ebron. After his Pro Bowl season in 2019, 2020 was a completely different story. In just 11 games, Ebron had 31 receptions, 373 yards and 3 touchdowns, but 5 drops and a drop rate of 9.6. And we can question the ankle injury and all that stuff, but he missed those final 5 games of the season. And then in free agency, the Colts lost Eric Ebron to free agency, but were able to pick up cap casualty the Chicago Bears, Trey Burton, who was being reunited by his offensive coordinator at the time, Frank Reich, when they were with the Philadelphia Eagles from 2016 to 2017. So Jake, looking at this tight end group, we know Philip Rivers loves to throw the tight ends. He benefited from playing with Antonio Gates for a long time with the San Diego Chargers. And we know Frank Reich loves to use the tight ends a lot in the passing game. So will we see Jack Doyle surpass his numbers from last season? And will we see Burton be more productive than what Eric Ebron was last year?
Well, before we get into those guys, you did this rundown and did not mention Chris Ballard's best quote of all time. It was 4 words? I think we'll move on. When they talked about Eric Ebron.
And his face, yes, and his face was the greatest because it's just like a face of dismay. He's just like, I think we'll move on. I don't think I've ever seen Ballard be more blunt in my whole life, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I remember watching that press conference live, and I'm like, love it. Let's get right to it.
In defense of Eric, I think that January was the worst time for them to talk about anyone because, Chris Ballard took that season on the chest. That's his roster, his team. He took that 7.
He didn't take it on the chest. He took it in the heart.
He did. He was very upset. So you heard Jacoby got a couple, slips of the tongue that Ballard's kind of tried to retract on it, but Eric Ebron got the brunt of it. That was hilarious. And, I think it goes to show that dude really undercut the organization. And it sucks it ended like that because it looked like the Colts had got a free agent steal, but it just goes to show Andrew Luck.
He looked like he was going to finish his career with the Colts. I know that's a long-term picture, but
it just goes to show Andrew Luck truly was the king of tight ends. You go back to Kobe Fleener, Dwayne Allen, and he had a season where he had those guys combined for like 1,600 yards and I think 16 touchdowns or some crazy number like that in 2014. And now neither one of them are in the league. So Andrew Luck fooled us with Eric Ebron. But kind of getting back on track to your question, Trey Burton's an interesting player because I think he has more athletic skills than Jack Doyle. Well, pretty much everyone has more athletic skills than Jack Doyle, but
yeah, that's kind of what I asked about. Could he have as productive as a season we saw Eric Ebron have in 2019? Because I don't think he's as athletic as Eric Ebron is or a vertical threat, but I think he can very much mold into what Eric Ebron did a lot in 2018.
Yeah, and I think Burton, I think it was a good signing. Number one, it was cheap. And, when you have a guy coming off of injury, it was a pretty big one. It's a hip injury. So, you want to make sure that that's not
the Bears are literally paying Trey Burton to play for the Indianapolis Colts this year, which is really nice.
That's Chris Ballard chess. We should be used to this by now. That's Chris Ballard chess. That's what he does. He's having other teams pay for our players. That's what Chris Ballard does. So you have a guy come in, but it was off of an injury. And now to even compact that or compound that, we had talked about the season being shortened in the last show, and, the offseason shortened. I mean, so what are they going to get a look at from Trey Burton in the offseason? How is he going to be able to integrate himself into the offense? And I just think for all the newcomers coming into this season, I just think it's really going to be a tough evaluation going into week one of how much they can rely on Trey Burton. And it's why I wanted them to be able to grab a tight end in the draft. And I completely unbiasedly wanted them to draft Cole Kmet in the second round. No agenda behind that whatsoever.
Oh, whatever, Jake. Don't lie to me.
But I did think that they needed to address that at some point. Unfortunately, they didn't. And, I think that it puts a lot of stress on Jack Doyle and Trey Burton to really step up this season. But I think fans are going to be pleasantly surprised with Burton. I mean, they're going to look at the contract and think he's not going to play an integral role. But, when he was healthy with the Eagles under Frank Reich's tutelage, he did have some pretty good seasons. So, he's been productive in the past. And, I think that if Jack Doyle's your number one receiver, you do need a guy opposite of him, because Jack Doyle, he's a great player. He's one of my favorites on the team. But the honest truth is Jack Doyle is not going to stretch the field for you. If a Jack Doyle catch goes longer than 20 yards, that's busted coverage somewhere. So Jack Doyle does a lot of things great. Down the field receiving isn't one. And I think to be, an effective offense in this league, you need to have those vertical downfield attacking tight ends. We see all the best offenses in the league have them. And, I'm just curious to see how Trey Burton can come in and fill that role, like you said, as Ebron did, and that's going to be a big question mark for this group in general.
Yeah, I'm looking at Burton, and he played alongside Zach Ertz when he was in Philly, so he wasn't the starting tight end. But, in the 2 seasons, he had 37 and 23 receptions, and that's off of 60 and 31 targets. He had 327 yards the first year, 248 the second year. But you look at the touchdowns, he had 1 in 2016. He had 5 in 2017, which 5 from a backup tight end I think is fairly well. And then you can even look in 2018 when he played for Ryan Pace in the Chicago Bears under Matt Nagy. And Mitchell, I hate to say it, but I think Mitch played fairly well in 2018 as the starting tight end. He had 76 or 54 receptions, just under 600 yards and 6 touchdowns, which I think if you can get that stat line of 60, 606, or even 7, I think that's actually really solid numbers for a backup tight end.
Well, not just that, but, really because of Jack Doyle's inability to stretch the field and give you bulk impact receiving numbers for a tight end, you're really talking about 1A and 1B. So if you can kind of smush that from Jack Doyle and from Trey Burton together, I think that's a really respectable season. I think that's something the Colts will take. The problem is, can both of those guys stay healthy? Because, I kind of look back on the receiving group a couple years ago or last year. And then, before that, it was kind of the cornerback group. And, it seems like every year this front office just kind of fails to address a certain position as much as they should. And I think the tight end position may come back to be that group this year because, if Jack Doyle goes down, man, I mean, we saw it last year how bad, I mean, really, and even in 2018 when Andrew Luck was still here, we saw how bad this offense looks without Jack Doyle, or how much different it looks. You look at, the rushing yards per game. You look at the efficiency.
I'm pretty sure the scoring offense went down like 5 points per game.
Way down. And, the numbers have been since long gone in my head. I'm getting old, so they don't stick with me like they used to. But,
we don't need Andrew Luck's stats anymore.
I dug deep into how Andrew Luck's numbers differed with and without Jack Doyle, and the QBR, the touchdown interception ratio, the points per game we scored. They were so drastic that you cannot ignore Jack Doyle's importance in this offense. And I think, especially with a guy like Frank Reich, the importance of a tight end in general. I mean, if you go back and retrace Frank Reich's steps here, Dallas Clark, Antonio Gates, Zach Ertz, and then Eric Ebron, having that top flight receiving tight end in his offense at his disposal is a huge benefit for him because, those guys can roam the middle of the field, find the soft spots in the middle of the defense, kind of run up the hashes, be able to attack those soft points. And Frank Reich is one of the best in the league. And one of my favorite things about him is ability to scheme guys open. And when you don't have that type of guy at that position, I think it just kind of hinders him as a play caller, and you don't get to see the full beauty of what Frank Reich does. Because because, we gave Andrew Luck a ton of credit for what he did with Eric Ebron, but Frank Reich deserved a ton of credit for that as well, because I think some of the plays where Eric Ebron was just, dude, he was running wide open. Me or you could have ran those routes and gotten open with the way he had schemed them and was able to get those guys open. He deserves a ton of credit for that. And it's just kind of, for me, kind of puts a little bit of a damper on it that they didn't address it a little more, because yes, I think Trey Burton has the ability to kind of fill that in a way. Jack Doyle does good things, but I really just wish they would have went out and added another dynamic element in that tight end group. And I just think that if one of those guys gets hurt, it's really going to put a lot of stress on guys like Mo Alie-Cox, who's really the only other tight end on the roster left. Roosevelt Nix might get some, inline blocking snaps if one of those guys gets hurt, because it's just such a depleted group right now. And I'm just interested to see what will happen if one of those guys gets hurt. So it's a very thin group. I think it's still decent at the top. Again, Jack Doyle made the Pro Bowl last year. He's a solid tight end. He's one of my favorite players. And Trey Burton, like you said, 6 touchdowns, 600 yards. It's not bad. But again, those guys, Jack Doyle just had an injury-riddled season a couple years ago. Trey Burton has had the hip injury last year, and both those guys are 30. So I just think that group is lacking a little bit in the depth, and I think it's lacking in the explosion department that really takes Frank Reich's offenses to the next level.
And I'm looking at the catch rate from both Trey Burton and Jack Doyle, and I kind of eliminate 2019 for both them guys. But you look at Doyle, he's around 75 to 77%. And Trey Burton, just behind him, he's about 74%, which I think if you can get over 75% from your catch rate from your tight ends, I think that's some really good stuff there. And it's going to lead to some really good reliability and dependability from those two guys. Looking career-wise, Jack Doyle's 73%, and Trey Burton's just behind him at 68%. So I think really it's kind of interesting reading more about Trey Burton, how he's a fairly reliable tight end. I thought he was more of like a receiver. I think PFR or PFF had him listed as the number 1 blocking tight end last year, or top 5. I remember seeing it. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Frank Reich dials him up on offense this year, especially Trey Burton.
Well, and Frank Reich was the one that advocated for Eric Ebron, and look at that, how that turned out when he had a quality quarterback. And now he advocated for Trey Burton, and they went out and signed Phillip Rivers. So again, Frank Reich, he does this offensive scheming thing pretty well. So he has a plan in mind for Trey Burton. It's not even necessarily that I'm kind of scared about the talent at the top. It's just like I said, if somebody gets hurt, where are they going to turn to? There's just a lot of there's just number one, not a lot of depth, and the depth that is there is either unproven or has some sort of recent injury history that leaves this position.
And not really young.
No, not young. Not those two guys, like I said, are 30 years old. So
yeah, you don't really have anybody in the pipeline like you do at receiver or even running back.
And like I said, I just feel like every year we feel like, and again, this is still early on in Chris Ballard's regime. I'm not going to, completely let him off the hook like it's 2017, but he's had so many different position groups to completely upend and overhaul. And I think that, with Jack Doyle there, and he has so much faith in him. That was the first guy he re-signed when he got here. So obviously he thinks the world of Jack Doyle, but at the end of the day, I just think that they should have done something, whether it be, invest a 4th, 5th, there was some undrafted guys, at least get, like you said, someone in the pipeline, because we've had Mo Alie-Cox here, and I've talked well about him before, but he's been here for years and still hasn't made an impact. So that's kind of like, okay, you start to raise the alarm a little bit on, is this guy going to translate from basketball to the pros, because he's still yet to make, a tangible impact outside of blocking. So I just think it would have been nice for them to at least grab another one. But, again, like I said, we're still in the point to where Chris Ballard is still churning over a lot of position groups and trying to fine tune where he wants it. And, having a guy like Jack Doyle allows him to kind of, look the other way a little bit on that tight end group. But, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year, we're sitting back on another pod saying, they should have drafted a guy because, Jack Doyle got hurt in week 8, or, Trey Burton was doing really well and got hurt in week 7 or week 9. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, they didn't do anything to back those guys up. And we've seen that in the past where, yeah, the top's good, but once they have an injury or two, then all of a sudden the floodgates open and it's a problem. And like I said, I think Frank Reich really likes to utilize the tight ends in his offense. So it could be problematic, but, I don't want to make too big of a deal out of it. But at the end of the day, it is something that I'm going to be watching for if they don't bring in a guy, at final cuts of training camp or whatever, if they roll with Doyle, with Burton, and with Mo Alie-Cox is really their three guys. I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out and if it comes back hurting them, not adding to the depth of that.
Well, you keep mentioning Mo Alie-Cox, so we'll bring him up real fast. Could this be the year that he makes a jump in production? This is his third NFL season. You did say that he's making that transition from basketball. And we kind of had a failed experience in that with Eric Swope a couple of years ago. And I look at, Mo Alie-Cox's stats. He's only had 13 and 11 targets in his first 2 years in the NFL. So I wouldn't say really that he's been integrated enough into the offense. But could we possibly see some more integration into the offense this year, or do you see him, more staying as just the run blocking tight end?
Well, I like him, and I think that, maybe that has something to do with them not drafting a guy. I just, I think that he has good size, obviously gigantic hands. The play of his career was that Oakland game, where Andrew Luck threw it way over his head, and he just engulfed that thing like it was a golf ball. So he has huge hands, great blocker, good athleticism. Obviously, he was a basketball player. Just got to put it all together. And I'm sure Frank has talked about it, them challenging him to kind of expand his route tree, be more reliable as a receiver. And before, we move on from him, I do want to point out that he also had a broken wrist, I believe, or something wrong with his wrist.
It was in a Tennessee game, the Tennessee home game earlier this year, I believe.
And he played through that, so who knows if that had to do with it? If he was just kind of,
Well, I would almost say this. I don't think he had surgery, so I'm gonna guess that it probably wasn't as severe as a lot of people thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, also too though, I'm not
gonna discredit him for playing through an injury though, because that's got to be some tough stuff.
I mean, and again, he's still young in his football career, so we don't know what kind of impact that made, if that altered kind of the plans for him. Maybe they did have kind of a plan to integrate him more as a passer, and
we could have saw that too, because Eric Ebron got hurt.
Yep.
I mean, 2/3 of the way through the year.
He just didn't. I think with his injury, wasn't able to fully take advantage like you would hope that he was. But again, this is kind of a put up or shut up kind of year for him. Year 3, you don't have 5-6 years to develop guys. I mean, guys are going to come and go. We talked about Jack Doyle and Trey Burton kind of being older. So they have to find a guy that's kind of ready to groom in that kind of the way Jack Doyle groomed behind Dwayne Allen and Coby Fleener. I mean, he just kind of bided his time, worked his way up, and now he's our number 1 tight end. So, is Mo Alie-Cox going to be a guy to do that? I don't know. I think he has all the tools. I think he has a good situation with Frank Reich as his coach. Phillip Rivers loves tight ends. So if there's an injury, he has to make sure he's ready for it. And I still think that he has to produce this year, because they're going to need him at some point or another on certain plays. There are things that he can bring to the table that guys like Doyle and Burton just don't. So I think that he does need to at least put a footprint on this offense at some point, like Fountain did last year in training camp, because, with when we talked about the wide receivers, Fountain making that impact in training camp has really kept his name alive in what's going to be a really competitive wide receiver battle. I think Mo Alie-Cox needs to put his fingerprints and his footprints on this offense, so that when we go into next offseason, people say, well, now wait a minute, we can't look past Mo Alie-Cox because he did this, this, and this. He hasn't done that yet. He's just kind of been there. He's like Raven Clark. So he's just kind of sitting there, kind of taking up a jersey number, and hasn't made his impact on this team. And I think that he needs to do that so that he can continue to hold a spot on this roster and eventually, hopefully, make an impact on this team at some point.
So looking at the tight end group as a whole now, who do you think is going to lead the team in the receiving categories, whether it be catches, yards, and touchdowns? Because I've been wavering on this one.
I still think it's Jack Doyle, man. I mean, Phillip Rivers with Antonio Gates for years, just, he loved having that kind of reliable possession guy, just that guy that knew where he was going to be. Being with Phillip Rivers, and people keep talking about his intelligence, Jack Doyle's kind of like the Phillip Rivers of tight ends. He's not going to overwhelm you with his intangible.
He doesn't have 9 kids, though.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Jack's probably a little bit smarter in that aspect to not have 9 children. I don't know how he survives, but luckily he makes millions of dollars a year.
Can we get a timeout on the podcast real quick? How did Phillip Rivers? He's moving into Carmel, I believe. That's where he said he's moving to. How did you find at least a 10-bedroom household in Carmel, Indiana? I even asked my dad in the middle of golfing today. I was like, how did you find a 10-person bedroom in Carmel, Indiana? And I know Carmel's kind of the upper echelon, one of the places to live in Indiana. But man, even 10-bedroom households, those are huge.
listen, when you are the parents of 9 children, you learn how to be creative. So there are kids either sharing bunk beds or they got a full basement down there.
They
One
probably
or the
have
other.
sets of bunk beds in a room.
Sets of bunk beds. Yes.
Looks like a camping house.
It looks like a less than ideal living situation for children. But, I mean, he says, hey, this is what they have in Carmel. Sorry, guys. Once I'm retired, we'll move out to wherever and build a 20-bedroom house because that's what he's going to need. But, Jack Doyle definitely has the upper hand in terms of having the foresight to not produce 9 kids. But, kind of get back on point, Jack Doyle is a guy that I think is really going to mesh so well with Phillip Rivers, and they've already got throwing sessions in, because the one thing that with Jack Doyle, despite all of his physical limitations, he is just so smart and he's so dependable. Like you said, that catch percentage is incredibly good, and that's something that Colts fans don't really appreciate, I think, the way they should, to have that high of a catch percentage, especially when he's a guy like I just said, he's not going to run away from guys. He's not going to, be burning down the field and he's making, number one, a lot of contested catches in underneath in the middle of the field. And, he's a guy that's attacking zones, knows where to sit, knows where to get down. He just knows where to be at all times. And I think that's really, really going to put him and Phillip Rivers in a really good place to have instant chemistry when you have two guys that are that smart, that know what they're doing. I think that Jack Doyle honestly could have a career year this year because, I know you like what Trey Burton did last year. I do too. And I like some of Trey Burton's physical attributes better, but I just kind of go back to with what he had with Antonio Gates and kind of those underneath types of things that they did for years. And I think that Jack Doyle having that type of intelligence and dependability is really going to allow for him to thrive with Phillip as his quarterback.
See, I think Jack Doyle will lead the team in catches just because, like you said, he's going to get those underneath receptions. But I think Trey Burton is going to get a lot more. He might end up with 40 to 50 catches, but I think they're going to be more of the 10 to 15 to 20, range, where Jack Doyle is probably going to get, 60 catches, but they're going to be in the, 7 to, 15-yard range. And so I think Jack Doyle might lead the tight end group in catches, but I think Trey Burton is going to lead the tight end group in yards and touchdowns. And because we saw, especially once they get really inside the 30-yard line, people say a lot inside the 20-yard line in the red zone, but really, once the Colts get in the 30-yard line, we saw it a lot in 2018. They love to go to the tight end. They love to attack the end zone with the tight ends. And I think, the Colts will very much do that again in 2020 with Phillip Rivers and Frank Reich and Trey Burton. So I think I could very much see Jack Doyle. He could be the guy. He's going to be the PPR, almost the PPR guy, where he's going to get all the he's going to get all the catches for you outside the 20s, but inside the 20s, it's going to be a lot of Trey Burton, a lot of the receptions in there, and a lot of the touchdowns in there. A lot like what Eric Ebron did in 2018.
Yeah, and I can get with that. I think if I was going to break it down more, up front, I would say that Doyle with the catches, Burton with the yards, and Doyle with the touchdowns. That's what I'm going to say. I think
Jack Doyle, he's not a big touchdown guy too, really.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say that he's due because I think, again, he has the type of savvy in those short contested areas to really do some damage. And it honestly is surprising. But when you look at it over the years, it's not like him and Luck just haven't connected on it in the past. It's that he's not really looked for that much. And I think that, at some point that could change because, again, when I talk about the catches he gets it's contested catches in traffic. It's underneath with a lot of bodies around him. I feel like that the red zone is a great place for Jack Doyle to thrive. I mean, he's 6'4", so he's a big guy. He has really good hands. He knows how to make contested catches. He knows how to catch the ball in traffic. I just think that it's honestly surprising to me that he only gets 4 or 5 touchdowns a year. And, maybe that'll just be what he is throughout his career. But I just think that when you throw in a guy like Phillip Rivers, who's attacked with, like I said, his history with Antonio Gates, he looked for Hunter Henry a lot. Hunter Henry didn't have the numbers because he was injured, but Phillip Rivers loves tight ends like Andrew Luck did. And, I just think that with Jack Doyle, there could be a spike in touchdown numbers just based off of the fact that, number one, T.Y. Hilton's never been a huge touchdown guy. Michael Pittman's still a rookie. Trey Burton's kind of new with this offense on this team. And, again, I just talked about Rivers and Doyle are already kind of getting a chemistry going, already getting together. And I just really see those two kind of similar style of play, similar types of players. I just see them meshing really well, and Jack Doyle having a spike in statistics. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just think that it is, number one, a surprise that Doyle's touchdown numbers haven't been higher, and number two, it's very possible that he sees a spike. But if Burton gets that, I wouldn't be surprised either, because like you said, he had 6 last year, which is, I think, higher than anything Jack Doyle's done in his career, or at least tied it. So if he gets it, it wouldn't be a surprise either. But Jack Doyle is a guy that I'm really going to be looking at to see how he responds to this season, as, really being the de facto number one tight end with Eric Ebron gone. That kind of division. I'm not going to say they had problems with each other, but there was kind of like, should Doyle be the tight end one? Should Ebron be the tight end one? That's really no more. I mean, really, Jack Doyle is our tight end one, and I'll be interested to see if he, as the sole guy, finally kind of spikes up a little bit in terms of his statistics.
Yeah, Jack Doyle's career high in touchdowns in one season is only 5, and he's also had 2 seasons of 4. He had 5 in 2016, and then, ironically enough, his 2 4 touchdown seasons both came with Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback. So
his 2 Pro Bowl seasons came with Jacoby too.
Yeah, and I just think it's interesting how Eric Ebron had 13 touchdowns receiving in his one season with the Colts, with Andrew Luck. Guess how many Jack Doyle's had in his 7-year career with the Colts?
I would say 20.
He's had 18.
Okay.
You also got to remember in 2013, his first year, he didn't play a whole lot. But even then, like I said, he hasn't been really a big touchdown guy. So, I mean, yeah, he could get 4 or 5. I think he could very much get that. I just think that Trey Burton could end up, having possibly 6, 7, maybe even 8 touchdowns. And I think, I wouldn't totally be surprised if, both of those guys have productive seasons, if both end up being on the Pro Bowl roster.
Yeah, if Jack Doyle ends up being a 3-time Pro Bowler, I think that's a gigantic success to his career. And, I think, again, I just want to see it for him, see those numbers kind of materialize, because I feel like he's super disrespected, especially by the outside fan and even in the inside fan. Like, I hear people call him trash, and it just really makes my blood boil, because he's one of my favorite guys. I think he's one of the best players on this team. And I would just love to see him be able to have like 1 7 or 8 touchdown season with like 700 yards and 60 catches, just to shut people up, so that he can stop being questioned when he does so much. When you dive into the analytics of what he does for this team, like, I just feel like he's hyper underappreciated by certain factions of our fan base and people outside of it. So maybe it's just my hopeful thinking that all of his years as kind of being this like grit and grind lunch pail guy is finally going to pay off. But again, with him and Phillip Rivers, I just feel like there's something with that similar type of player skill. And just looking back on Jack Doyle's career, like, he's never really gotten the looks in the red zone to be a double-digit touchdown guy. So I don't think that, it's that he can't do it. I just don't know if he's been given a fair opportunity to be able to do it. And we know, Andrew Luck really likes to spread the ball around a ton. So maybe Phillip Rivers locks in on Doyle a little more in the red zone. But again, it'll be interesting to see how that works out. We have a lot of turnover at key positions, and tight end's one of them. And I think, regardless, I think Burton was a really good signing for the price. I think that he's going to be able to add another dimension that we wouldn't have had he not been signed. And I think that as long as health remains on the up and up, I think this is still going to be a pretty solid group.
Yeah, so that's going to wrap up this episode of the Circle City Sports Podcast. If you're a new listener, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the show if you've been brought on from the State of the Colts series. We're going to continue that next one with the offensive line to finish up the offense, and then we'll get into the defense, which I know I'm fairly excited about. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Appreciate you guys coming on and listening. We hope you guys have a good rest of the day.